perhaps I should start with Proudly South African, and just simply because this is your gig, this is your function, this is your summit. What do you want us to be talking about and why?
The main reason why we convened the summit is because there's a need to create jobs. I think there's no doubt about that. I think the work done by the DTI in the Industrial Policy Action Plan, the work done by Economic Development Department in the New Growth Path, points to the fact that there is a need to create jobs. The target is to create 5 million jobs by 2020. And I think all of us have a part to play. So the role that Proudly South African plays in this instance is that we need to stimulate demand for local products and services, because the departments have come up with strategies to tie. I mean, the New Growth Path and the Industrial Policy Action Plan both point to the fact that there is a need to sort of improve on the levels of consumption of local raw materials and the production of goods and services that are consumed on a day-to-day basis by all stakeholders, that is. And that's why, as Proudly South African, we've taken up the role to say, in stimulating demand and creating that demand for local products and services, we need to get various role players into and under one roof into this summit. And this is the second time we host the summit, and the idea is to get both government, captains of industry, representing business, obviously, as well as ordinary consumers, and to get them to start talking around how we can improve the levels of consumption of local products and services, because there are perceptions out there that I think also need to be managed around the quality of the products, the competitiveness of the products, of local products and services.
But what do you mean managed? Yeah. I mean, what does that mean?
I think in terms of managing the perceptions, what I mean is that the belief out there is that what is local might not be good quality. There's belief that the country might not have capacity in certain instances, whereas it's not the case. And that's why one of our key partners is the manufacturing sector. And that's why we have
Are you saying that's simply a perception? I think Are you saying it's not rooted in certain realities?
Look, in most instances, it's perceptions. There are sectors where we know the country does not necessarily have capacity, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true that in those sectors the country can't produce at all. It might be an issue of saying, can we produce up to the level that the country requires? The demand for the products within the country might not necessarily, we might not be able to meet it with what we've got in the country. But in other sectors, there are sectors where the country can produce.
All right, Minister. Perhaps a point to bring you on, Minister, because I remember last year, and we were talking about the accord that was signed between social partners, government and industry, particularly big companies, local procurement. What lessons have we learned from that? Is there anything that you can share with us?
Well, I think the first point to make about the accord was that government included its own commitments into that accord. So government is a big procurer in this economy, both regular goods that we purchase, things like workwear, uniforms, food products that are consumed in government departments, and then also things that are linked to the infrastructure program, things like railway equipment, pylons, buses, and things included in, for example, the health sector, like oral solid dosages. All of these, we have introduced designations. So we have said that according to various technical specifications, such and such a percentage has to be procured locally. And that's a decision that we've taken as government, because we need to stimulate the productive sectors of our economy, which have not been growing as fast as they could do. It's a decision which is very much in line with what other industrializing countries, fast-growing emerging markets are all doing, something like that. Then I think the accord comes in because we say that we can multiply the impact if private sector players took similar procurement decisions. If, for example, the Chamber of Mines decided that it would buy locally when it bought mining equipment, if the private hospitals were to follow suit from the government designation and buy locally produced pharmaceuticals, that could multiply the impact. And then the third level is that if ordinary consumers decided that they would be conscious and that they would tilt the balance when they're making consumer decisions in favor of local products, we could significantly enhance the demand for local products.
But for both those 2 points, point 2 and point 3, the issue is competitiveness. And this is what big companies have raised, including consumers who are saying, well, I'll buy that which is cheap. I'll buy that which is competitive in terms of price.
Well, of course, we do recognize the importance of competitiveness. So a lot of our incentives as the DTI are precisely intended to support competitiveness raising by local companies. But actually, when we take price and quality, those two factors together, we find that there are many local goods that are actually competitive. quite often the products that you're competing against are not very high quality. Sometimes we have products that enter and don't meet the compulsory specifications in terms of quality standards. So I think what we are saying is that when you see something that has proudly South Africa label attached to it, it's not just that it's made in South Africa, it's also meets quality standards, it meets environmental standards, and it's produced according to fair labor practices.
Sure.
All of those together, and we think that that is actually a competitive product in many, many respects.
And I'm going to come to you in a minute, Mr. Jennings. But Minister, again, let me just give an example of a case that I recently interacted with the officials in your department about, and perhaps it also shows some of the difficulties that are there at a policy level and at a practical level. It's a case of South Africa accusing the Brazilians of dumping chicken in our market. Now, that case is ongoing. Perhaps there are certain things that you can't say about that case simply because it is ongoing, as I understand. But the truth is, what then I did, I went to the department, spoke to people in your department about this, even went to speak to some of the local chicken farmers who are saying that, one, they are losing contracts with big retailers at the expense of the Brazilians who are coming from outside and bringing in their chicken, something that we should be doing here at home. So part of it is really about policy, that government allows the Brazilians to come in and dump their chickens.
Well, I think that, in fact, what we found that it's not just Brazilian chicken. There's imports coming from all over.
Yeah, but I mean, last year it was 57% from Brazil.
There's too many, too higher level of import penetration of chickens, and I think we are responding to that. There are trade remedies which we can use. That was the whole purpose of the anti-dumping investigation. Which is the matter of discussion with Brazil, but there's also the more favored nation, the average tariff, which is an instrument which we're considering as well. So in that particular case, which, as you say, there are discussions and decisions which we haven't taken yet, we are committed to trying to support local chicken production. Sure. And I think that what we want to do is we want to encourage not just government, but also private sector players who are procuring chickens to actually look and see the South African chickens, which I think do meet various quality standards as well.
And the reason why I'm raising this issue is that it's not just the chickens. Even if you go to the Western Cape, if you talk about clothing, if you talk about textiles and so on, that government is going to make certain decisions and do certain things before asking us as locals to buy locally and also to ask companies to procure locally.
Well, we have done that. That's exactly the point. That we've put in place the designations. We are also reviewing the entire procurement system. So, for example, we've got the National Industrial Participation Program, which is the so-called offset program, where we found that it's not been implemented as it should be. And Cabinet has approved that there should be a restructuring of that program as well.
Sure.
So we are basically saying that whenever we make decisions as government, we will favour South African products and South African
But what about the
production.
protection? What about the protection of local industries?
We take decisions on tariffs and on trade remedies. We take these on a case-by-case basis, evidence-based process through the International Trade Administration Commission. So it's not directly a government decision. But we have indicated that we believe that there ought to be a strategic approach to trade policy, and that trade policy should be, in fact, subordinate to industrial policy. So where we have industrial policy objectives, where we have procurement objectives, we should also be willing to use the trade instruments as well. That's our position.
Mr. Jennings, and the reason why I started there is obviously to look at everyone's role here, that it's well and good to say, well, procure locally, but competitiveness has got to do with trade policies of the country and competitiveness and all the issues that we've spoken about so far.
Yes, it's all embracing. I think the points that both Justus and Minister mentioned, I so totally endorse. But the private sector needs to step up to the plate here, because we could move it much quicker. You know, it's very easy to say that our quality is not good, which is not true. I mean, we make the best motor cars in the world. We make very good textiles. There's virtually no product we don't make, which really is borne out by our export to the European Union, which is a quality market. So I don't think the quality issue holds. I also don't think the capacity issue holds, because many of our manufacturing companies invested significantly up to 2008 before the recession. There's a lot of spare capacity in the manufacturing sector, and this is also one of the reasons why the manufacturing sector particularly is not investing at the moment, because there's plenty of capacity. And what we need is economies of scale. You talk about the competitiveness. And what's happened at the moment, because we've been affected by reduced exports to the European Union and the flood of imports, which is my big concern, it's reduced our competitiveness even more and it's taken away economies of scale.
Let me just on that point. It's a very important point. Flood of imports. Who's supposed to regulate that? Isn't the government supposed to deal with those issues?
Well, yes, it is, but it's also the private sector. You see, if you look at a lot of imports that come in, and particularly from areas of Southeast Asia, there's a thing called quality fade, which is known all over the world. And the quality is inconsistent. The one thing about South African quality, it's consistent. You know where it comes from. We should support it. The other point, which has not been mentioned today, is very important, is the multiplier effect. If we're going to grow this economy, we have to create jobs. And by buying imports, you're actually shrinking the economy. And if you look at the success of this economy over the last 2 years, it's been based on debt and consumption. And it hasn't been really supported by the retail and wholesale sector supporting manufacturing.
Local retail sector.
Local retail sector. And that's what we need, because if we need to grow jobs, most importantly, and you're only going to do that by supporting South African products.
It's a very good thing to say, but the reality is that the retail sector also has certain demands. Customers want good material, want good stuff, want certain things priced in a certain way.
Well, you certainly will have quality, but can we compete with unfairly incentivized goods? The Minister also mentioned the importance of fair labor practices. Now, South Africa generally has fair labor practices. And many of the companies that are exporting to South Africa don't have those. And then you've got to talk about the environmental issues.
So what do we do then?
Well, what you do is support South Africa. I think our products have become a lot more competitive. If we look at the PPI, which is producer price index, it's dropped significantly. So that means prices out the factory gates have been more and more competitive over the last couple of years. In fact, they're reaching a level now where there's so much margin squeeze that we're finding company failure. So we need the support of all South Africans to go out and support us.
But the truth is, it's not going to be sentimental. I'm not going to do it because you need to just so that I can create jobs. It's got to be, there are certain factors that are involved.
Well, firstly, we've got to support quality, and South Africa does make quality. Secondly, you will have to pay a little bit more, because if we're going to pay fair wages and everything else, then you've got to have fair margins. Otherwise, you'll go out of business and you'll destroy our manufacturing base. And people have to realize that. This multiplier effect is vital if we're going to grow this economy and get GDPs like we have in the rest of Africa.